Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching AHealthcareZ. Today's topic is the top 6 communication tactics in healthcare. So there's this famous psychologist named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote the famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He won a Nobel Prize in economics. And he once said, look, people like to do business with others that they like and trust. So if we're going to be successful in healthcare in terms of improving patient care and transforming healthcare for the better, then it's important for us to have the communication skills necessary for people to like and trust us. Okay, so I then looked up the doctor of communication. Believe it or not, there is a doctor of communication. It's a gentleman by the name of John Lund. And he said, look, when you're communicating, the other person is actually thinking about 3 things. And this is what the other person is thinking about. How painful is this going to be? How long is this going to take? And what does this person want from me? Okay, so that's super interesting. So if we're going to effectively communicate with people, then we need to keep in mind those 3 priorities of the other party. Now, the next point I want to make about communication is there's really 2 big forms of communication, right? There's in-person communication, or there's verbal communication, and then there's email, right? In the workplace, there's gobs of email. And so guess what? There was a survey that found that 49% of workers actually prefer email. Now, it has a little bit to do with being introverted and extroverted. Introverts tend to prefer email and extroverts tend to prefer talking. And it turns out that introverts comprise about 35% of the population and extroverts comprise about 65% of the population. Now, it's on a spectrum. You're not either one or the other. There's gradations in between. But just know that when we're communicating, there's obviously talking and listening, but then there's also writing and reading. So what we have then is a matrix where you have a row of conversation, speaking and listening, and that can be either in person or on video or phone. And then we have reading and writing, and that's typically in the form of email and texting. Okay, so within those 2 rows of communication, we then have the 3 columns from Dr. Lund of, okay, is it painful? Is it long? What do they want? And so that then gets us the 6 key communication tactics. Okay, fine. So for conversations, how to make them as least painful as possible is to have them be one-on-one, because it's only through one-on-one communication that we can actually effectively form relationships. So the point of communication isn't just to convey information and to gather information, but it's actually to form a relationship with that other person. It's what Stephen Covey calls the PPC balance, where P is the production and PC is the production capability. P is the production, what was actually communicated, and production capability is, okay, it's the relationship between the 2 people to allow for future communication. In other words, the liking and the trusting. Okay, next up, to make conversations less painful, use enthusiasm, right? Regardless of your faith, there's this guy Solomon from the Bible. He wrote these proverbs. One of them goes, "He who refreshes others is himself refreshed." So it's super helpful for yourself and it's super helpful for the other person if you have a conversation with them where you have enthusiasm, even when you don't feel like it, right? So if we're in business, to a certain extent, we're in show business. So we got to have enthusiasm in our conversations. Okay, next up, to make it less painful for the other person, we need to listen. And we need to have the majority of that conversation with them actually be listening to them, not us telling them stuff, because them having to listen to us is pretty painful. Being listened to is much more pleasant. So to make the conversation less painful for the other person, let them do the majority of the talking. Again, like Stephen Covey says, we're going to seek first to understand and then be understood. Okay, that's great. That's how you make conversations less painful. How do you make emails less painful? Okay, 1, send them earlier in the day and send them early in the week, okay? Listen, people get totally burned out by email. It's kind of like playing a sports game. There's the first half of the day and there's the second half of the day. There's the first half of the game, there's the second half of the game. What happens in the second half of the game? People get tired. So if you want to send an email, send it either earlier in the day or earlier in the week, or if best, early in the day and early in the week. Okay, 2, did you know that 50 to 60% of work emails are read on a mobile device? They're read on a smartphone. It's small. The recommended font for reading things on smartphones is 16-point font. Okay, what's the standard on most email? It's like 11 or 12. It's too small. Now, about half your email is going to be read on a laptop, so I kind of compromise. I use 14-point font. So like I don't like enlarge it every time. I set my default in my settings for my emails to go out at 14-point font. Listen, I can tell you, these things have bifocals, okay? If you're emailing anybody who's middle-aged, right, they probably have some degree of farsightedness. So like, help them out with their like readers, okay? And make the font bigger. That makes it less painful. All right, next up, in conversations, how long should they be? Okay. People's attention span dramatically drops off if it's longer than 10 to 15 minutes. So try to keep your conversations to 10 to 15 minutes. It is amazing how much you can accomplish in 10 to 15 minutes. And certainly have your meetings be 30 minutes or less. This whole hour-long meeting business is a bunch of mumbo jumbo, right? That's painful, right? To a certain extent, the long conversations and long meetings are painful. So make them short. Be like, hey, can I get 10 minutes? Hey, can I get 15 minutes? Maybe if you're really trying to push the issue, you're saying, hey, ask for 30 minutes. Do not ask for an hour, okay? You probably don't need an hour, all right? Now, just the amount of meeting time that people are in these days is ridiculous. Back in the 1960s, people only had 10 hours of meeting time. Nowadays, they have 23 hours of meeting time a week, right? So keep it short. All right, now, how do you make your emails short? How do you respect the time of the reader? Did you know that the average person only spends 9 seconds reading an email? People don't read email, they skim emails. Okay, well, how many words can you read in 9 seconds? It's about 25 to 30 words. What's 25 to 30 words? It's like 2 sentences. So really, you should think about your emails almost more like texting. So just know that if you email a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 4 or 5 paragraphs, like chances are the other person is only going to spend like 9 seconds reading your 5-paragraph email, okay? So keep it short. All right, next up. What do people want? What do you want from me, right? It's like, I know you're talking to me because you probably want something from me. Okay, well, how do you answer that? You have very clear expectations in your conversation of who needs to do what. And I found that if you're trying to accomplish a task, it's always good to be like, look, here are some things that I'm going to do, and here are some things that you're going to do. And maybe that person picks the things that they're going to do, but instead of just being, I need you to do this and this and this and this, but it's actually to like volunteer to do some things as well, so that it shows the other person that, look, we're trying to work together towards this goal instead of me just delegating everything and then it just appears, I mean, I'm sure you're busy, but this way at least it shows them that you're going to put forth the effort in accomplishing the task mutually. Okay, next. Then what needs to specifically be done? Obviously, there needs to be clear expectations around it. Like, just explicitly say what it is, right? And that's not rocket science. And then find when it needs to be done by. Okay, so who's going to do it, what needs to be done, and when's it going to be done by? What's helpful for the when is just to ask the other person, when do you think you could get this done by? And let them choose it, because in their mind, they've got all these other deadlines they're trying to balance. So like, let them pick it. And a lot of the times, they'll actually pick something sooner than you wanted to. Now, of course, sometimes you're going to have to specifically dictate it, but a lot of the times, if you let them choose it, they're also much more likely to get it to you by that deadline because they set it themselves. Okay, next up, for the email, in terms of what they want, make sure you have a clear call to action in the second sentence or the third sentence of your email. That clear call to action should have a question mark in it. I mean, that's the point of the question. Could you do this? Question mark. What do you think about this? Question mark. Okay, so the specific thing that you're asking has a question mark. Don't phrase it as a sentence. Specifically phrase it as a question with a question mark to make it stand out. What else are you going to do? This is where you can highlight. If you're going to underline or bold anything in an email, then like the call to action is a good thing to underline or highlight because it stands out of like, look, this is what I want from you. It's very clear expectations around that. Okay, so fine. So those are the 6 communication tactics. Now, that is all surrounded by, okay, how can we communicate in a happy fashion? What is happiness in communication? Well, we all know what the secret to happiness is. The secret to happiness is low expectations, okay? So just know that when you're communicating other people, like, you should expect that other person is probably not going to be a great communicator. And you got to understand, I've got another video on this, that there was a Gallup poll that found that 2/3 of employees are not engaged at work. At best, they're just checked out, and at worst, they actively hate their job. Okay, so just know that 2/3 of the people that you're interacting with, like, they're not necessarily going to be great communicators because they're not engaged. They're checked out or they're angry. Okay, so just know that when you're not going to have like some sort of like perfect response to these 6 tactics, right? You just have to know that you've got to have really low expectations in your communication, because all healthcare organizations are essentially cesspools of miscommunication. But there's only one thing that we can control, and that's ourselves. So let's actually work on these 6 things that we can control ourselves to improve communication in healthcare. And that's my point for today. Thank you for watching AHealthcareZ.